This is Afternoon New Music on WKCR FM New York and WKCR HD1 89.9 FM. I'm your host, Bill Dougherty. Today I'm joined by composer and sound artist legend Annea Lockwood, whose music will be presented at an evening-length composer portrait concert at Miller Theatre on Thursday, November 14th at 8 p.m. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Annea is a New Zealand-born composer who has lived in the U.S. since 1973. Annea is known for her explorations of the rich world of natural acoustic sounds and environments in works ranging from sound art and installations through text, sound, and performance art to concert music. Her music has been performed in venues and festivals around the world. A little bit of background on her: she graduated from the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, then moved on to the Royal College of Music in London, and then attended the Darmstadt summer course in 1963 and 64. She also attended the Hochschule für Musik in Köln and also did some studies in the Netherlands. Then, in the 70s, 1973, she moved to New York. She then went on to teach electronic music at Vassar College and became a prominent figure in the New York experimental music scene. A number of her works can be found in the amazing publication from 1966 to 1973, Source, the Music of the Avant-Garde. You might know her because she is perhaps most famous for her Fluxus-inspired pieces involving burning, drowning, burying pianos, a piece of hers called Piano Transplants. So thank you so much, Annea, for coming in to talk with us today to share your music with us.
A great pleasure, Bill. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's so great to have you here. So I just want to start by asking you some questions about your concepts of how you like sound to play out. So in your music, it seems that, and in other interviews you talk about how sound, you just want sound to be. You want it to complete itself. And I'm wondering if you can tell us not only how that manifests in your music or in your scores, but also what is the philosophical, political, aesthetic behind this idea of just letting sound be itself and doing as little as possible as you can do to it?
Nice big question. Let me see. For one thing, I'm in love with timbre in all its aspects, and I have been, I think, all my life, really. And when I find a sound which, to my ears, is really rich in its inner details, I like to have that sound last. If it's a sound arising from a gestural event of some sort, I like to have that sound last for its entire duration so that a listener can hear the shifts within the sound as various details come and go, emerge and fade out. And that was one aspect of the glass concerts, which was of great importance to me. The other aspect of my love of letting sound be, so to speak, is to do with sounds which emerge from non-human environments and human environments, but I'm especially interested in non-human environments, which arise out of an energy, an expulsion of energy from some phenomenon or another, and carry that energy within the sort of contours of the sound. You can feel it and you can sense it. And I want to let that energy play itself out so that it can be felt in its entirety.
So would you say that you're suspect of human fussing around with sound?
No, it's a totally natural human activity. It's what we love to do.
Yes.
But for myself, and sometimes I think I'm in a way an observer rather than a maker. And certainly not a manipulator. At least I prefer not to think of myself as a manipulator. I like observing what happens with sound, whether it's a manifestation of a natural phenomenon or whether it's something I or someone else has discovered by rubbing this piece of material against that piece of material. Or whether it's a gesture by a player, which is absolutely natural to that player's character and way of working, which plays itself out.
And so you often talk about this idea of you're looking for complex sounds. That there's that, whether it's the river, the sounds of the Hudson or the Danube, or to the sound of a burning piano, for example, that there's these, you're in this search for complex sounds. Why not simple sounds?
I wouldn't say so much that I'm setting out to look for complex sounds, as that I love to listen to them when I discover them, because I feel as if it takes me then a little while. It's a process that I then sort of embark on. It takes me a little while to, as I sort of think of it to myself, to hear my way down through all the layers of what's going on inside that sound. And it's Pauline Oliveros would have said, it's a refocusing of attention, right? Which is exactly what it is. And so the more your attention, more finely tuned the focus becomes, the more you hear, and the more comes back to you from the sound, in the form of energy, in a way. I think we take energy from sounds. We know we do that. Otherwise, rock concerts wouldn't be the enormous events that they are, and hip hop and everything else.
So in talking about these modes of focus, or let's say modes of listening, do you feel that in your music you try to encourage different modes of listening? And if so, how do you encourage different modes of listening through the material that you use and how you present it?
I don't know that I'm able to, with any clarity, distinguish modes of listening, actually. I don't think I think of it that way.
Okay.
I do think of it as immersive at its best.
Okay.
And that's really important to me, especially with the, well, not as, I guess, especially with the non-human phenomena. I'm wanting to set up I'm hoping to enable a connection to arise. Not so much set it up, because you can't, but for it to arise between the person who's listening, who's hearing a sound, and the phenomenon which is generating it. So that as a listener, as somebody hearing that sound, you feel, your body, for one thing, becomes deeply affected by the sound immediately, just physical functions and blood flow, blood pressure and so on. And so you begin to make that sort of physiological connection to the sound, and maybe if it's a really interesting sound event or amalgam of sound events, you get drawn inside it, so that you're no longer aware of, I'm here, sound is coming from over there, but you're right inside it. So there's not a non-separation. Yeah,
there's two interesting points you bring up here. One is the becoming one with the sound source, which is fascinating. And the other one is this listening focus thing. So I want to start with the becoming one with the sound source. Is this, so you often talk about kind of there's a spiritual side. You don't say spiritual, I don't think, but you do talk about kind of ritual or the trance that music can provoke, or kind of like in you talk about Sufi music sometimes, or like the shamisen, in different cultures where music is this kind of, I don't know, this uniting force, or this kind of inner looking or meditative or transformative thing. Is this something that when you're talking about creating this connection where the person becomes one with the sound source, is this part of that, or is it different? Is this something that's not really spiritual?
I think it's. Let me answer by backtracking a little. Yeah. In the 60s, mid 60s through the mid 70s, because I was really interested in and learning as much as I could about how our bodies respond to sound. on the basis that as composers we're always putting it all out there, we should at least know what we're doing to inform people with a little responsibility for what we put out. But which isn't as flippant as it sounds. I merely meant it.
Yeah.
But I was really trying to listen as much as possible, learn as much as possible about how our bodies respond to sound, which got me interested in how different cultures work with sound. I got interested in the Sufis because there's such a strong, quite apart from being drawn to Sufi writing, there's such a strong non-division between music and other forms of spiritual practice. It is a form of spiritual practice. I got interested in trance because I was trying to figure out what parameters of music most strongly influence people's bodies to draw them into trance if I could. I could never figure it out. And I did a series of experiments with Peter Gogono in England. We were trying to figure exactly that out, which parameters, how much repetition before the subject just dozes off, which we quit because we had to make our materials so enormously simplified that there was no relationship to the original. But that's why I was interested in trance. And ritual, because it is involved, it embodies so much of this, the practice of all this knowledge. But since then, I haven't been trying in a way to reproduce circumstances in which things like trance could arise. I haven't been looking to do that. I think I'm looking for something a lot simpler. You hear a sound, it enters your body.
Yes.
It changes physiological functions, even though you don't know it.
Yeah.
You become immersed in it. You're sort of swimming in it. And it may or may not give rise to all sorts of associations in your mind, some of which may be really lovely. Like, as with the river installations, for example, people often begin to remember images from when they were kids of being at a river that they particularly love. Sure. And out of that, I always hope can come conservation, an instinct towards conservation.
Okay.
So it's a lot simpler than looking
at trance
and ritual. Yeah. But I learned, I learned as much as I was able to from that, and it was fascinating.
Yeah.
Look into.
So why do you think that? Why do you think that we need? This is a kind of a broad question about our society. Why is it that we don't listen in our lives in the way that you are encouraging us to listen in your music?
I think people do, actually. We're very drawn to bodies of water, and we're often drawn to mobile water, right?
Yes.
A river moving through shallows and so on.
Stagnant water is not
Waves,
a good sign.
No, and not unless you're looking for foods by them.
Yes.
So I think part of why we're drawn to water, and it manifests all over the place, under perfectly ordinary circumstances, right, is that the sounds of moving water can be very lulling to us. I mean, I've long thought that there's a sort of double mental response to those sounds. On one level, they sound reiterative. They have the rhythms, these recur, so that's lulling the way a lullaby is lulling. On the other hand, they never actually, literally, repeat themselves. There's always so much going on inside, and complex. It keeps changing. Yeah. So it seems to me one level of the mind which is constantly scanning for new input and new stimulus is satisfied. And the other level of the mind, which really wants to let the body just relax and sort of fall into a rhythm, is also satisfied. So it sort of works on two levels.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think we do it to ourselves.
Yeah.
For ourselves. For example, Ros Band's work in Australia, and Hildegard Westerkamp's beautiful work up in Vancouver and in Germany, and much other work, Jana Winderen's work in the Arctic, Cheryl Leonard's work in the Antarctic. There are a lot of people, David Dunn's work, because, and my river archive, my river sound maps, what we're doing, it seems to me, is framing that experience.
Yes.
And in framing it, we're actually setting those sounds running, even though virtually, in a space which people can just be encouraged to come to, which may be round the corner.
Yeah, well, it's so
from
interesting.
where they live.
Just changing the context of the sound completely changes the way that it's listened to and encourages us to change our focus. You might pass by a river every day on your way to work, but you're not listening to the river. You might be listening to, today you might be listening to a podcast or whatever, and you're walking by or thinking about what you're going to have for lunch, but you're not listening to the river. But when you frame it at an installation or on a CD and you say, this is my work, here, take it and experience it, then people will, it seems to me, listen into the sound.
Yeah. I think so.
Where they may be less inclined to do that in their daily life.
Well, in our daily lives, we're very often preoccupied with identifying the source of a sound and moving on.
Yes,
it's
exactly.
An ancient and obviously practical.
Yes. Oh, it's a siren. Okay, turn it off.
We've been doing that as long as we've been on the earth. Right?
Yes.
Yes, it's the river. Okay, that's the river. It's a little windy today.
Yes.
That's nice.
Yes.
And then you move on to the next thing.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
So you need this immersion and identification with the source of a sound needs a calm space in which that is the central focus, and you're not multiply distracted unless you happen to be checking your latest messages and texts.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we can listen now to a snippet from Sound Map of the Hudson River. That was Annea Lockwood's Sound Map of the Hudson River from 1982. You're listening to Afternoon New Music on WKCR FM New York and WKCR HD1 89.9 FM. I'm joined today by composer legend Annea Lockwood, whose music will be presented at an evening-length composer portrait concert at Miller Theater on Thursday, November 14th at 8 p.m. We've been talking about her work with recordings of rivers, and you just heard the sound map of the Hudson River, which was originally an installation piece, and of course is now, you can get it on CD as well, but the original length we were talking about was over 2 hours. So the CD is just a slice. It's just a slice of that. So I wanted to turn now and talk about your glass concert, which seems, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but it seems like it was a pivotal work in how you imagined sound. So how did this piece, maybe you can describe to us a little bit about the piece and how it changed your perceptions of sound.
If you went to a glass concert, I think there were something like 83 performances of it around different parts of Europe and Australasia. And the last performance was at WBAI Free Music in New York in 73, which
Wow.
somehow always pleases me since I made New York my home in that year. If you went to the glass concert, you would enter at kickoff time. The theater would go completely dark, not even any exit lights, and you would hear a good 20 to 25 minutes of sound which you couldn't possibly identify the source of, which was one reason I chose glass, looking for sounds which were unidentifiable in terms of source, so that people would have to listen closely. There's a sound of chemistry beaker rods rolling down a glass pane, for example. There's a sound, which is certainly unidentifiable, of a sheet of 4-inch by 6-inch microglass, extremely thin glass, which is commercially cut up into tiny little, 2-inch squares, and used for electron microscopy slides.
Okay.
But the size in which it comes off the process is 6 inches by 4, and I used to hold it up very close to a mic, maybe 2 inches away, and hold it loosely so that it could flex in my hand, and just shake it gently. And surprisingly low tones emerge from that, given the size and the thinness.
Okay, that is odd.
Oh, it's beautiful too. And as long as I treated it very carefully, didn't tighten my grip, it didn't break. It was lovely stuff. So those are two of the sounds that you would have heard in complete darkness. And there were a number of others. And then lights would come up, stage lighting would come up, and the stage was filled with a huge glass mobile. Huge, I say, because one of the panes was 6 by 6. Big, wired glass, big pane. And
big pane in two senses.
Yeah, well, yes, actually. It was pretty heavy. And then this was quite a mobile. It around the outside edge were red laminated mirror glass sheets, which I could twist in my hand and turn and set spinning so that the light reflected off them from the stage lighting just bounced all over the theater. And inside that circle were panes of varying sizes. I would set them swinging against each other so that they just tipped each other, just enough to make each other sound, but not enough to shatter, which was a lot of fun. I used to think of it as bullfighting because I had to keep dodging. There were two what we call bottle trees. You see them in vintners yards, right? Yeah. And among other ways of playing them, I used to shake handfuls of tiny pieces of microglass down through the bottles, which were very delicate, really beautiful sound. There were 3 curtains, as it were, of long glass rods. It'd be about maybe 4 feet, 4.5 feet,
There's
5 feet.
There's a photo of you walking in between them, right?
Oh, yeah. 1 row of thicker ones, bigger ones, 2 rows of small, thin ones. And I would just walk between them and sort of play them with my hands, just draw my hands across them.
Like wind chimes or something.
Yeah, beautiful sound.
So you were usually player 1. Was it player 1 or player 2? Were
you
the person making the sounds, or were you the person on the stage?
I was one of 2 people making the sounds. The other person was the person I was living with when I started doing his Harvey Matuso, and he designed the lighting. And found some of the sounds, and
Okay.
I got him playing some of them.
Okay. So the person on the stage who was dealing with the light wasn't you. You
No,
were the person
the
making
lighting,
the sounds
the-
behind the stage. Is that
yes,
right?
and
Okay.
then on stage.
And then you would come
And
on
then
stage.
Yes, after
Okay.
about 25 to 30 minutes of darkness, we'd bring up the stage lights. I would appear on stage and
Okay.
start playing the stage instruments.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Which I was just describing, and the theatre team, whichever
Yeah.
theatre it was actually running the lighting, but
Right.
Harvey would have designed it.
How did this process of developing all these glass instruments, how did it change your relationship to sound?
It was very radical. I really started. It started from an idea to begin with, which was a right turn from my relationship with sound.
How so? Can you explain?
Well, I'd been working in Köln and in Holland, as you said, and what I was doing in the Netherlands was actually studying electronic music with Gottfried Michael Koenig,
Okay.
which was a great education. He was
Yes.
a wonderful teacher.
Algorithmic electronic music.
And algorithmic is not my shtick, as it turns out. But this was before he went to Utrecht even. And we were working with oscillators and ring modulators and filters and the old analog, sort of original analog equipment. And I began to find the sounds that we were compiling sort of boring, inherently boring. And in sort of mulling that over, I realized that the ambient sounds that I hear in my life are more interesting, more complex than what I was fabricating in the studio, and realized I could never put together a sound as layered and complex as a river, for example. I just was never going to be able to pull that off.
Yeah.
And so I decided to switch both towards doing more work with environmental sounds, but also looking for a sound source which would be unrecognizable to the audience's ears,
Yes.
initially at least, and focus the ears intently, and inherently complex. And I came up with the analogy of a necklace in which each bead is beautiful, but when we string them as a necklace, you just see the necklace. You don't necessarily see the beads.
Right.
And I began to think of composition as like stringing a necklace, where all the beads have a use and a function, but are not prized in their own
Yes.
detail and beauty necessarily. So why not break the necklace and take a bead and present it as a composition in itself? I was arguing that these sounds are already beautifully structured in a way I could never concoct,
Sure.
and are essentially small compositions in themselves. So let's listen to them that way. One sound source at a time, generally. Sometimes one sound at a time.
Yeah.
And glass seemed to me a medium that really hadn't been much explored. There's a glass harmonica, etc. But beyond that, about the time I started working with it, the Glass Orchestra in Toronto started working with it too, which was great. But up to that point, not much used, and therefore not identifiable.
Ah, yes. Okay. And would you say there's another symbolism? Are there any other kind of why glass? Yeah. So besides it not being easily identifiable, are there any other? I don't know. There's many things just off the top of my head. We all have glass in our lives. It's usually part of our dwellings. Yes. It's see-through. But also it's, generally cheap to make. It's like, readily available. So it's an item that's also kind of everyday.
Accessible.
Yeah, it's see-through, but it's also very fragile, which is sort of beautiful. I'm wondering if any of these kind of characteristics of glass and our relationship with glass had an impact on why you chose glass and not rocks or clay.
Oh, I've done a lot with rocks.
I know. That's why I said
Right,
rocks.
Carefully chose rocks.
That's why I'm saying rocks. Why in this kind of very seminal piece that you did that you chose glass at this stage of your life?
It's hard to separate intent from experience.
Yes.
really. But I find glass really beautiful. I think I always have. I find its iridescence a lovely aspect or attribute. And in terms of, we talked about intent, in terms of experience, when I hooked up with the Pilkington factory, which Harvey had suggested I do, and started going around. Pilkington's was a major the glass monopoly, basically, in the UK at the time.
Okay.
When I started visiting their factories, and they started showing me all sorts of objects, glass products, objects, which were pre-market, like the microglass sheets, which don't appear on the market in that form, which were pre-market, including rocks of glass, which is just debris. Wonderful green, sea green rocks, which I would sort of make rock against each other.
Yeah.
And I started collecting all this stuff off the factory floors and off their shelves and off their tables and so on. And they were really enthusiastic and started making me wooden cases in which I could transport them. I mean, beautifully made cases. Then the material itself was amazing. It sort of flowered in front of me, There were all these different types and sorts and sizes of glass, which all made different and wonderful, really unfamiliar to my ears, to sounds, and which were wonderful to work with, play. And one of the things that I really loved about glass and I sought out, and which Nate Woolley and I bonded on immediately, was Nate for his breathing apparatus and his instrument and his electronics, me for the material and my fingers. Once I started working with these different types of glass, I found that there was a point at which I couldn't anticipate what the glass would do anymore. It sort of took control. Yeah. And then it was just a matter of allowing it to continue to vibrate without stifling it and see what it would do.
Yeah, you talk about this as well. I mean, this isn't the only thing that you refer to this, that your material, you like when your material takes over.
It's a revelation.
Yeah, so what do you think? So much of Western music history is about the composer manipulating.
It's about control.
Yes, the material, about the master composer, genius composer, being inspired from whatever. It's coming down, inspiring them. Then they control the sonic material, and then they give it to the passive listener to have the sounds wash over them and enlighten them in some way.
And it's passed through the reproductive mechanism of the player. Meanwhile, right?
Passing
Not
through
to be
our
omitted.
sorry, but passing through the reproductive player, of course. So this idea of the material somehow being autonomous, or like you seeking that out in a composition. Is it in relation to this history of Western music that I just laid out? Okay.
It's exploration. It's the practice of exploration. And when I said I think I'm more of an observer than a fabricator, that's part of the process of, observation is part of the exploration process. And sometimes I think, especially, but not only with the non-human environmental work, but also with pieces for performers and so on. Sometimes I think what I'm exploring is, or what I'm attempting is a way to come to a sense of knowing the world, or not knowing in the concept of traditional knowledge, but as in knowing with your senses, knowing with the tips of your fingers and the soles of your feet, knowing the world.
So it's about experience. It's about showing or illustrating the human experience. Or
it's about discovering.
Exploring.
It's about discovering.
Discovering, yeah.
So with the glass, it takes over. Then I'm beginning to discover what that material is like, what it wants to do, And the same with players.
Yeah.
This is why I'm getting such joy from collaborating with players like Laura and Ning and Ian and Russell and Nate and Tom Buckner for many years and others, and Lois Swart. just this is exactly
Yeah.
at the root of those collaborations.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, I always had perceived it as being a thing related to John Cage, being this kind of, well, trying to take the creator out, trying to take the ego out of the work. And actually, it's not that. It's more nuanced than that. It's like actually trying to appreciate the human experience of sound, or it's this discovery process, this exploration. It's the ego is fine actually.
Yeah.
It's not.
Oh, to strip the ego from oneself is pretty.
Well, you can't.
Pretty difficult.
You can't. I mean, that's the.
No, you
I mean,
can't.
the irony of the
Yeah.
of the whole Cagean experiment is like, well, he decided to roll the dice.
Yeah.
That is his ego. Like
Yeah, that's
he's
right.
making decisions, and we can't pretend that he's not.
The ego's like your shadow. There's no way to
Exactly.
get rid of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
And so what's the point? Why would one even want to? It's part of one's makeup. But
yes.
But you can move. You can move. You can't move outside of it or beyond it, but at least you can open possibilities up to other people's egos, other people's imaginations,
Yeah.
to the natural, vibrant qualities of various growing things and so on, you know, and exploring all of that. Yeah.
I think we should listen to some of Glass Concert. So we'll listen to a selection from your CD, The Glass World, but it's
based on Glass Concert.
Glass Concert.
Glass Concert 2, which I just ended up calling Glass Concert because I never went back to Glass Concert 1. It got subsumed.
Right.
You start performing a piece, working with a piece, and it grows under you and it changes. So, with any luck.
And I just want to read this just almost for myself here. So it's a quote from inside the CD, The Glass World, of Annea Lockwood, and it says, "I have become fascinated by the complexity of the single sound. I have treated each sound as if it were a piece of music in itself. For me, every sound has its own minute form, is composed of small, flashing rhythms, shifting tones, has momentum, comes, vanishes, lives out its own structure. Since we are used to hearing sounds together, either juxtaposed or compared, one sound alone seems simple. But so are the round, scruffed stones lying around everywhere, until you crack one apart, and all its intricate beauty takes you by surprise." You were just listening to an excerpt of Annea Lockwood's The Glass World. This is Afternoon New Music on WKCR FM New York and WKCR HD1 89.9 FM. I'm your host, Bill Dougherty. Today I'm joined by composer and sound artist legend Annea Lockwood, whose music will be presented at an evening-length composer portrait concert at Miller Theater on Thursday, November 14th at 8 p.m. So I want to ask you, Annea, about your collaborations with Nate Woolley, with Yarn Wire, Thomas Buchner as well. It seems that, at least from what I've read and what I've experienced, that each collaboration is different, that each piece is actually specific to the performer. There's no, your music is not a commodity that can just be passed from one ensemble to the next. Why make it specific for performers and not make it a commodity?
Because I'm really interested in the personalities, inclinations, and their own sonic discoveries of performers, and I want to be working with them as equals, rather than laying something on them, so to speak, and asking them to reproduce it the way I want it reproduced.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
Or even reproduce it with their own inclinations, but I would like to make them even freer. In relation to how they work with materials. So let me go back to when did we do it? Duende, one of my earliest flat-out collaborations, which was Thomas Buchner, in which I made a proposition to Tom, and he picked up on it and does it, which I think is absolutely extraordinary. And yes, it's his piece. It's our piece. No one else does it. Duende, the proposition I made to Tom, which was based on my listening to shamanic recordings in the BBC earlier, we referred to. I'm interested in that sort of material, but was not in any way to replicate, shamanic processes and so on. Nevertheless, what I'd heard in those recordings was how the shaman's voice changes as she or he goes into a different state of being, which was fascinating to me. So I proposed to Tom that we do a piece in which he would allow his voice to take him over and just use him. Rather than controlling his voice, just let it take him over. Then where do we go? Right. So Tom and I got together, and he created a vocabulary of extended vocal sounds, which are his personal sounds, which he loves to work with. And I made a pre-recorded mix of sounds such as bamboo moving, a kia, which is a New Zealand parrot's call, which I love. It's a wild, fierce call. All sorts of other sounds. And Tom and Duende moves through a succession of states, really, each one created by using certain sounds from his vocabulary. And then he moves on to another group of sounds, and little by little his voice does indeed take him over, and the pre-recorded sounds are intended to create a sort of world around him, for his voice to, as it were, nest in, and give him ground under his feet, and he does it magnificently. Then to look at the two recent collaborations, there have been some others, but the recent ones which will be on the program. In 2017, I started working with Nate Woolley. I think we finished that piece. We haven't finished that piece, which is really nice.
Yeah.
I mean, the piece keeps growing. It takes complete form, and then but there are all these avenues of escape for it, so to speak.
So this is your piece, Becoming Air.
This is Becoming Air. Yeah. So we started working on Becoming Air, and again, I asked Nate to, in our first meeting, to show me the sounds that he has discovered, that he's working with, that he's eager to work with and excited about. And I recorded them, and they fell into sort of groupings. but also we were talking about music a lot, and we discovered that this commonality that we both absolutely love it when the sound escapes your control, when whatever the process is no longer within your control. Then what happens? And let's see, and where does it go, and how exciting, which was great. So we built on that. I created a sort of rough, loose framework, which we talked through and pushed around, and we started meeting every so often at Issue Project Room in that big space with all that resonance, because
and you love resonant spaces, right?
I love resonant spaces, yes. And that was where it was going to premiere. Yeah. So Zev at Issue Project Room very generously gave us access to that, and Nate had a residency there at the time. We kept evolving the piece together. Nate would work on, perform or play a section of it, and we'd think about it, and every now and then I might make a suggestion or not,
And is this Becoming Air title, is it related to this idea of becoming one with the sound source? Or, as air being this...
I have to confess, it just came into my mind and I liked it, and I ran it by Nate and he liked it.
Yeah, okay, yes, yeah.
And it has meaning for him in connection with how crucial air is, after all, to what he's doing.
For those who don't know, Nate Woolley is a trumpeter, and so
right. I mean, how central it is, And I think it probably resonated in my mind with ideas of becoming something which is deeply yourself, or. And it's been a wonderful process. I love that process. I put a tam-tam in there.
Yes.
Right off the bat, really. I wanted to, thinking of the trumpet range, other than its fundamental, which is surprisingly low, but beyond that, thinking of its range, I thought, let's get some bass sound in there. And I thought of a tam, and thought how its resonance could create a sort of resonant space around the trumpet, around Nate. And little by little, we've been using larger and larger tams. So
I've also noticed that in the recording at the Issue Project Room that there was sort of electronic processes or effects on the trumpet. Was that Nate's idea, or? Okay.
It's part of his.
Setup,
way of working.
Okay.
And he gave me a bunch of recordings when we met, which were great. I just went to Montana for the summer and listened like crazy and sort of figured out a basic framework that we could discard or use, or just somewhere to start based on those recordings. It made sense to me. That came... It was very clear.
Okay.
With those recordings, it was really clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're very open, very flexible to whatever the performer comes with. You want to use their talents and their comforts to kind of enhance or to discover together in an area that they're comfortable with.
Yes,
right?
I guess it's a little like walking into their sound world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rather than giving them my sound world to fit themselves into. It's walking into their sound world, and I almost invariably find we have a lot in common.
Yeah, yeah.
Our worlds have a lot in common, so it's not a hard thing to do at all. As for to just move back and be a little more specific, Nate's use of electronics. On those recordings he gave me, I heard what he was doing with feedback. And Lord knows I've been acquainted with feedback for, 50 to 60 years at this point. Yeah. But I was really astounded and struck by the beauty of how he uses feedback. So the piece moves towards a feedback.
Yes.
A massive feedback.
Right.
Which dissolves gradually on its own.
So you're even adopting his kind of his, it's great. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a complete collaboration.
Yeah, it makes you like more like you're like, it's just I guess there's not enough of that in the, let's say, Western art music world. Yeah. As we talked about earlier, but the idea of the composer as creator and, the performer as passive or, let's say, less active person trying to recreate what the composer imagined. And this is you trying to come up together with a sound world that is both your own. And so when you, let's say, publish these pieces, however they are published, do you say by Annea Lockwood and Nate Woolley?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
By Annea Lockwood and Jan Weir.
Yeah.
By
and with
Annea
Jan
Lockwood
Weir.
and Thomas Buckner.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, I mean, the creation is done jointly.
Of course.
Totally.
Of course it is. It's just that composers for years and years and years have not acknowledged this.
Well, that has to change.
Well, I agree with you. So I just wanted to talk briefly about how it is that you became a composer, considering that you came up, your formative years, I guess, were in the 50s, right, would you say? And so you're in Christchurch, New Zealand. How is it that a young lady in the 1950s was supported and inspired and given the agency to pursue a serious career in composition? Where did this come from?
Lots of support.
Yes.
New Zealand's a very musical country.
Yes.
Music's really important.
And that bird you said earlier.
Oh, and the Kia. Yeah, the Kia takes the cake in terms of sound production. And there've been a series of composers in New Zealand going back quite a way, and they're really strongly supported, including some women, which matters very much.
Yes.
If you're a young girl growing up. My mother had done some composing and some choreography, was
Okay.
really creative energy and a lot of fun to be around, and taught me to notate very early
okay.
on. Put me in the hands of an excellent piano teacher who
Yes.
also encouraged my composition.
Yes.
My mother taught me to notate. My piano teacher's husband ran a small string orchestra. He was a violist and taught strings, and so got me to write a piece or two for the children's string orchestra. The university in my town, the University of Canterbury, the music department was headed by a composer, Vernon Griffiths, a different tradition, British choral tradition, basically, but very encouraging and really helpful. From the time I was a child, he would just sort of keep his eye on who the young kids were who were musically involved in the city, all the way up through my bachelor's degree. And I got encouragement from up in the North Island, where there was a group of composers who were interested in evolving contemporary techniques.
Wow.
As Darmstadt was,
So
gaining strength.
So you had a super supportive early
really.
childhood development. How about when you made your way to Darmstadt in the 60s? Was there, obviously the 60s sort of open up a bit in terms of...
a lot.
Open up in a lot of ways. But so was there, what sort of pushback have you experienced? Not to like detail your oppression as a woman composer, but like
I haven't felt oppressed.
Yes. Okay. So then have you?
I should say.
Are there things that you've noticed along the way that you've had to kind of push back against and say like, I'll do what I want? Are there instances where?
No, actually.
No.
It's been amazing.
Yeah.
I went to Darmstadt.
Yeah.
Twice. I went there when I was in my second year at the Royal College of Music, and then again in my third year. And my composition professor, Peter Racine Fricker, was the one who told me, you've got to go to Darmstadt.
Yeah.
Which was a great move on his part.
Yeah.
He had been there.
Yeah.
His music had been played there and so on in Donaueschingen quite a few years. When I got to Darmstadt, and the second time I was looking for someone to inculcate me into electronic music and teach me that. And a friend I made there, Franco Evangelisti, an Italian composer, introduced me to Miko Koenig, who was in Köln at the time, and I went on to get a year at the Hochschule, which meant really studying with him essentially privately, writing acoustic piece. I did a whole sort of quite a long setting of various of Kafka's parables for
Okay.
baritone and instrumental ensemble. But also he would take me every month. I would go with him to the workshop in electronic music he was running in Bilthoven, Holland, which is just before he went to Utrecht.
That's Gaudiamus, right? Bilthoven.
Yeah, there you go, Gaudiamus.
Yeah.
Yes, where I was the only woman. That's when I guess that's when I really began to notice being
At what age are we
one
now?
of the
20-something?
relatively few
Yeah. So
fewer women. At this point, there's an efflorescence of women
Yes,
composers,
yes,
which is
yes.
marvelous.
Yes, but previous it
not
was,
so much
yeah.
then.
Ah.
But then I have to say that I didn't feel it in England, in good part, I think, because there were three. At least there were a number of women composers active in England, Daphne Oram being a major
Yes, of course.
figure.
Yeah.
But there was also Elizabeth McConkie and Elizabeth Lutyens, who was a powerful composer, a really wonderful composer, as was McConkie. But Lutyens was especially, her music is especially attractive to me. And others, and highly respected, often performed, commissioned. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So now we're going to turn to a recording of Buoyant on Annea Lockwood's Ground of Being record. Can you tell us just in 30 seconds what Buoyant is about?
Buoyant, it's an electroacoustic piece, short one. It starts with water making a most amazingly sort of stomach-like plops between rocks, riprap on the edge of Flathead Lake in Montana, where I spend my summers. Moves on to a yacht basin in Lake Como, and the great shifting metal plates of the Weehawken Ferry terminal in New Jersey. And where else does it go? Oh, and every now and then as a cadence point, you'll hear a bocce ball going back and forth on a very nice, gritty, sandy course. The balls knocking against each other. I made it for just the sheer fun of making it.
Great. We're very much looking forward to listening to Buoyant from Annea Lockwood.
Just one small correction. It was the Hoboken Ferry Terminal, not the Weehawken Ferry Terminal.
That was Buoyant from Annea Lockwood. It was an electroacoustic piece from 2013. This is Afternoon New Music on WKCR FM New York and WKCR HD1 89.9 FM. I'm your host, Bill Dougherty. Today I'm joined by composer and sound artist legend Annea Lockwood, whose music will be presented at an evening-length composer portrait concert at Miller Theater on Thursday, November 14th at 8 p.m. So it was a very long question. I'm going to try to narrow it down here. How have you, as a composer who has worked on the institutional fringes for years and years, you do not fit the classic model of writing a work that is commissioned and then, a written work to the ensemble, then the ensemble performs it, and that's the end of the collaboration. Your work is usually outside of this, either installation or working with glass or sounds that are not traditional Western musical instruments. But when you do use traditional Western musical instruments, or you do work with an ensemble like Bang on a Can or Yarn Wire, it seems that you need extra time. You need to actually get to know the people, and very often these things are not built into the institutions that commission new works. So I'm wondering, how have you dealt with this over the years? How have you managed to keep creating and keep imagining and not let the institutions prescribe how you create?
I think mostly when I'm writing for instruments or voices, mostly I'm writing in response to a request, or working in response to a request from performers who already have a sense of what sort of work I do. So they're not looking for me to be creating meticulous scores. I can do that too, and I have, but they're not necessarily expecting that. Yarn Wire, for instance, approached me good 2 years ago, asking if I could make a piece for them, and I'd heard them and was electrified by them. They're fantastic musicians, wonderful imaginations. And wished that I could have been able to, but at that point I was working on several other things, including the installation for Carrowmore and wasn't able to do so. And then they gave me a lot of pleasure by coming back to me, bless them, and commissioning this piece, which now has the title Into the Vanishing Point.
And which you'll hear at Miller Theatre
yes.
on Thursday night at 8
p.m.
p.m.
It'll be premiered there. Yeah. Which is absolutely a group composition by the five of us.
Okay.
And we've been having great rehearsals, great working sessions. They're working sessions. The last one of which is coming up next week. And it's been amazing each time to hear what they've thought of in the interim, hear them making sounds I haven't heard before, and refining sounds I have, and interacting with one another. It's a great process.
But how about previous to, so now you are a known entity, Annea Lockwood, famous sound artist, composer. So previous to this, let's say in the 60s or 70s, when you're doing things that are then on the fringes, how did you, and people didn't know to come to you and say, oh, Annea, could you do one of your collaborative pieces that you always do with ensembles, because no one knew?
I was living in a sort of sea of people like myself.
Yeah. Okay.
In London and in New York. I was lucky when I came over here. I'd met the Sonic Arts Union people who've been great to me.
Alvin Curran, for example.
And David Behrman and
Gordon.
Gordon.
Gordon Mama.
And Pauline and a whole slew of the really wonderfully adventurous New Yorkers and Americans.
Yes.
And I loved what was going on in the American musical scene. It was fantastic. And there was nothing like it going on in England at that point, which was in a sort of mini depression. So it was wonderful to be here. In any case, in both countries, as I said, I lived in a sort of sea of people who were, many of whom were working as I was, on the fringes, and we supported one another. We gave each other opportunities.
Yes.
That still happens, right?
Alvin Lucier will reach out to you and say, Annea, can you...
Well, here's an example of transition from academic to elsewhere. Stephen Moore, my friendship with Stephen Moore. Stephen and Scott Smallwood, when they were doing a doctorate at Princeton, wanted to incorporate the piano transplants into their doctoral work and put on but also some other things. And they put on a performance which somehow incorporated, I don't remember how now, the piano transplants along with other things. And then they were curating a series of concerts at Issue Project Room, the original, or Suzanne's Issue Project Room, and invited me to do an evening with them. And they incorporated my work into that, and little by little. They and I swear David Behrman and possibly John King and Takehisa Kasugi were responsible for getting me a commission from the Cunningham Company. So we were working together on Jitterbug. For the Cunningham Company, and Stefan was the mixer, was the fourth man, so to speak, the fourth person for that. So
it's really just the community
pulling
and then each other, moving each other forward.
That's right. And so then the most recent iteration of that friendship, or the most recent example of how that friendship moved, was when Stefan was appointed to curate and came up with the idea of a sound art component to the Carrowmore Festival in Katona, and commissioned, I think, 14 sound artworks, which were wonderful. For one of which he commissioned me and Bob Bilecki.
Wow.
And we did Wild Energy together. And now Carrowmore bought it, and so it's going to be there every year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which is really wonderful and really a thrill. Like the Miller concert is a thrill. That sort of thrill.
Yeah.
So, so here's a friendship that started in Princeton. Right?
Yeah, right. And now has transformed. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my feeling is very much that we are a community, a cluster of communities.
Yes.
And it's not that we only give work to each other by any means, but that you know your friends' work. And so if you're curating something, you know which work would seem a natural fit and you involve that person
Mm-hmm.
in that
Mm-hmm.
situation and talk to them about other people who would be a natural fit
Sure.
too. It sort of works in a very human way, I
Yeah,
feel.
yeah. Like
It's not, I don't really see it as competitive. I haven't experienced it that way, actually, that I can remember, and I don't see it that way. I do see it as a sort of natural interchange,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We're not doing big favors for one another. We're not a sort of alternative fringe elite.
Right. Yeah,
You
yeah,
know?
yeah.
We're just human beings, and we know each
Yeah.
other's work, and
Yeah.
we support each other's work,
Yeah.
and we're also interested in who else is emerging,
Yeah.
and we proceed accordingly. Seems to me.
Some last questions I want to ask you. These are sort of just big questions about where you think music is headed. What do you think music is for? So what is the role? How do you view your role as a composer today in our society? What do you think the role of the composer is?
I've been avoiding thinking about that for such a long time. I guess, what I would hope is that what we do can catalyze feelings around something like species extinction, non-semantically. And that can be powerful.
This was something that I decided not to talk about, but maybe we can go there now. But this idea, this semantic versus non-semantic referral of real world, let's say current day issues, like your Guantanamo piece or the other pieces you did with Thomas Buckner, where you have text that is referring semantically to, well, this is poetry by inmates of Guantanamo Bay. So it's not actually, they're not saying, it's not saying Guantanamo is bad, but that is the message.
Oh.
The message
you
is...
couldn't hear it any other way.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is the message is that.
Yeah.
It's like, message received.
Yeah.
But so I guess...
Or I Give You Back.
Yes.
I Give You Back, which is a setting of the wonderful Muskogee Creek poet laureate, Joy Harger's. I see it as exorcism, as an exorcism of fears and traumas, and her words are astonishingly powerful, and generated a song line in me, which doesn't happen very often. It was not attached to any physical singer. It was just I needed to take her words into myself and then let them come out in my own form of expression. When I said catalyze feeling, I think I was really I was thinking of the river sound maps.
Yes.
For example, in which I hope to evoke people's feelings about water and rivers and pollution and imperiled rivers and all the issues surrounding water use and access to and lack of access and so on, to just sort of catalyze that in a feeling connection between the listener and whatever body of water she or he is attached to.
But without saying it.
Without saying it.
Yes.
But every now and then I feel a need to express something directly.
I see. When you come out and you
something
give your
I feel
speech,
very
you say,
strongly about.
Yes, you
and
say, this is messed up, Guantanamo Bay, we need to just...
Yeah.
And then, but the river is more nuanced or something, more subtle. It's more subtle.
Yeah, it's hoping to induce or to let people move into a situation in which they can feel that sort of connection to the river, and then they can, and then thinking or feeling further may take them in the direction of conservation, or may not.
Yeah.
But at least to awaken or reawaken or evoke a sense of attachment to rivers and so on. Guantanamo, I just had to say something about the use of torture, because I've been reading about that, looking at it for about 20 years. Night and Fog comes out of a lot of that reading. How can How can human beings do this to one another? What is it in us that allows us to do this? And at least with with Night and Fog, I was setting Mandelstam, Ossip Mandelstam and Carolyn Forche. Mandelstam, God knows, experienced imprisonment and oppression directly. Forche saw so much of it in El Salvador and was so immersed in it, but not herself imprisoned. At least with Guantanamo, I like to go to the source as directly as possible, and prefer not to be just making analogies. And the source of what people were experiencing in Guantanamo seemed to me to be their writings, the writings of the prisoners themselves, which some of which have been published.
Yeah,
in
that book.
Poems,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
poems from Guantanamo. So that seemed to me, that's the source of what is happening there to people, how they are living through it. How are they living through it? What are they enduring? And we need to hear their words. We kept hearing, with Guantanamo, we kept hearing other people's words about what was being done to the prisoners as if they were disembodied beings,
Yeah.
I thought we needed to hear them directly as is possible with poems that are translated and then translated further into song. But
so how much, I mean, this idea, this like, I mean, that makes your music, not that it ever wasn't, but it makes your music really, it's a political, I'm putting in air quotes, but like political, like you're really trying to carry a message. And
often, yes.
And is the message, humanity? I mean, is the message that...
you have to figure it out yourself. As long as with Guantanamo, it's obvious, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty clear.
Yeah.
Because I felt so strongly that we really needed to have some sort of, as far as possible, direct connection to what people were going through.
Yes.
With other things, like Night and Fog, it's less clear, but I would like you to find your own way to the message, because then it's your experience, it's your interpretation, right?
So then would pieces that have more direct messages, are they more closed, would you say?
I hope not.
Yeah.
I
Well,
hope
there's a big, I mean, this is like a big argument between, for example, people like Helmut Lachenmann and sort of Adorno people, Theodor Adorno people versus like, talking about Luigi Nono and his protestations of, in his...
Il Prigioniero and so
Yes,
on,
exactly. Yes. And it's like very clear. And does that, I mean, it's just a big hanging question. Does it actually limit the listener's access, or limit the interpretation, somehow limit the person who has experienced the work if the message is more clear? It's just a big question. I mean, I don't know the answer to it, and I'm wondering: do you consider this when you set out to write a piece like
No,
in
I
our
don't.
name? Yeah, not in our name. Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I'm just hoping to make as direct a connection between the listener and, in this case, those three prisoners,
Yes.
as is possible under the circumstances. It's still awfully indirect, but that was as close as I could get, and needed to say something, and sound as my medium.
Yeah, right.
On the other hand, I do things like floater, toy piano music box, a little tiny little grand piano with about 30 helium balloons over the audience's head.
Yes.
I have fun too, a lot of fun.
Yes. But that is in itself, I mean, any sort of act of composing, and also composing a piece like that, or creating an experience like that, is political. I mean, it's really saying that this person who composed this piece with the helium balloons and the toy piano floating over the audience and did Not in Our Name. Is it Not in Our Name or In Our Name?
No, people keep wistfully trying to correct it to Not in Our Name.
In Our Name.
It's
Okay.
deliberately In Our Name.
Okay, In Our Name. I mean, there's a very clear connection between the freedom that you are expressing. It's in the same mindset somehow of freedom, of liberation, of
That's true.
non-conforming. Because the whole thing with Guantanamo is that everyone was just kind of going along with it, as if it were okay. This is the thing.
Yeah.
And a person who has a toy piano float over the audience is not a person who goes along with it. This is a person who says, I'm going to do whatever I want. This is something that interests me. This is something that's fun. And I'm going to do it. And I don't care who you are. And I don't care what the circumstances are, but I'm doing it. I'm going to fill up those balloons. I'm going to float that toy piano.
That came from considerations of scale. There's a beautiful American pianist, Jennifer Heimer, who lives in Germany, Hamburg, who is presenting a concert of works for piano and derivatives, meaning each piano, toy piano, and that was about as small as she was going to get in that concert. She asked me to make a piece for her. I've done other work with Jennifer. She's great to work with. So I thought, well, how can you get smaller than a toy piano? Well, you can actually get a music box piano. They're very small. So I had a vision of having a music box piano at the end of the concert, having been sequestered inside a grand. It's tiny enough you can just stick it in the corner, but with these 30 helium balloons floating above the grand, just released at the end of the concert.
It's building up a lot of tension.
Float out, there you go, right. over the audience, playing whatever tune that music box was set up to play. And she had a music box she had been given by her mother, which played Memories, which was perfect. So that came from a consideration of scale.
Yes, okay.
And I knew she had the right temperament to enjoy that piece.
Yeah. So my last question for you is about your musical legacy. So you're 80 this year. You're having this huge Miller Theater portrait concert, which means you're an important person. You have made a mark. You are doing something that people are going to be looking back on for a long time. How do you envision your musical legacy? What is it if there's something that when people talk about you and talk about your music and experience your work, what is it that you want people to come away with? I know that's a big question, but I think you must. Do you think about this? And if you think about it, what have you come up with?
That I better get my documents in order, which I never do. No, I'm being facetious. What would I want? I would be very happy if my work with natural phenomena and what we call the natural environment, which is sort of reductivist because we're part of it. And usually it's
humans
us
are natural,
and the natural environment out there. In any case, my work with the environment were to contribute to the increasing massive work that's being done about our relationship to our environment, embedded in our relationship to our environment. If I could have made some sort of contribution to that, I would be to how we engage with the world around us, how to change our bases for engagement. I would be really happy. There's a lot of work being done by a lot of people. I would be happy to be part of that, to be considered part of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us today. It's been really enlightening, and it's been an absolute joy. Thank you for joining us on Afternoon in Music.
Oh, thank you so much,
and
Bill. It's been fun to talk to you. It's been lovely to talk to you.
And I just want to plug one last time. We've been talking with Annea Lockwood. She has an evening-length composer portrait concert at Miller Theater on Thursday, November 14th at 8 p.m. It's sure to be a doozy.